Have you ever found yourself in a situation where communicating with somebody felt like an uphill battle? If you answered yes to this, you are like most people in the world. And the key to handling conflict when beliefs collide isn't to convince the other person what to do, but to shift our focus entirely. And that's a big ask. In this session, we're going to talk about the conversations that we avoid in training, the ones where our clients maybe are pushing for fast results, for quick fixes. Maybe they believe in outdated training philosophies and are using tools in training that we would like them to stop using. This is that place where we feel caught between educating people and alienating them. But what if these difficult moments could become our greatest opportunities? This requires skill. And today I'm going to share with you some things that I learned over the years as a conflict resolution specialist and a professional dog trainer. Some tools of communication to help improve your connection with your clients and to help you navigate through those sticky moments, those difficult conversations, and maybe the conflict that can arise. Welcome to Dancing with Discomfort. Sometimes when I work with people, I have the pleasure of them really absorbing the messages that I really work hard at getting to them, because this quote came from a client of mine, a former client of mine. His name is Brendan O'Mara. I'm driving down the road one day and I'm listening to his podcast, the Creative Nonfiction Podcast. And I had worked with him in 3 of his dogs' very difficult family situation and blended family with these dogs. And as I'm listening to him, as I'm going down the road, he says this quote, and it really embodies everything we're going to talk about hard conversations, is unpleasantness is part of the game. It's part of every game. And those who learn to make peace with that and dance with that are going to tend to have a more satisfying experience. We're going to try to change our perspective on conflict, or at least have a wider understanding of it, so that it's not something that we see as a threat and want to avoid right away, but as something that we can learn to stay with, so that in the end, we have a more satisfying experience. So what is conflict resolution? Conflict resolution is a set of dialogue skills and a mindset that's designed to help people navigate through hard conversations and difficult moments, rather than avoid them or attempt to control the other party. And it involves these elements. And this is what I've studied for the last 13 years, is supporting another person's experience and learning to actively listen with sincerity and humility, understanding their perspective, maintaining our curiosity, even when we feel least like being curious about them, developing our problem-solving teamwork together, finding that willingness to dance with unpredictability, because unpredictability is just going to be part of this world if you're working professionally with animals and in this industry. Finding common goals rather than differences to focus on, because when we feel threatened or we feel like we're in conflict with somebody, immediately our mind goes to those differences that we have, and we want to try to connect with those common goals, but it's not going to be enough. It will be our starting point. And then the last part of the elements that fold into conflict resolution is managing our emotions in a heated discussion. Now, there's 5 myths of conflict that I want to kind of dispel before we go into what do we do about it when we're actually in it. The first one is that conflict is always negative. That's just not true. There are, a lot of people believe that conflict is inherently bad and it should be avoided. And that's not necessarily true. It's not something that we want to avoid or that is bad. In fact, it's natural. All of us are experiencing conflict in our lives every single day. And it's just at different levels, right? It's just at different levels. And if we manage it well, it can lead to better understanding. The second myth is that it can always be resolved. And some disagreements are going to remain unresolved, particularly if those are rooted in somebody's, deeply held core values. So not every conflict is going to have a solution, and that's okay. The third myth is that avoidance is going to be our best policy when we find ourselves in conflict. And avoiding conflict can seem like, an easier way and easier in the short term, but it frequently adds to the unresolved issue, because the conflict that we're having doesn't go away. It's still, lying under the surface. And so those unresolved issues build resentment. And so when we avoid it, it doesn't really change that we still have to deal this and face with this issue at some point. The fourth myth is that resolution means that everybody must agree. And conflict resolution does not always mean that we're going to reach total agreement. Sometimes what it means is that we're acknowledging that we have differences and we're still finding ways to work together. And the fifth myth is that compromise is always the best solution. Compromise can be really useful, but it can sidestep the deeper issues brewing, just like avoidance can. And effective resolution is going to require that we learn to dance with discomfort and that we learn to continue and have ongoing dialogue rather than opting for a quick fix. So let me introduce myself again. I'm a recovering fixer because that's what I always went to in my former years. And instead of opting for a quick fix, we're going to really learn what we need to be thinking about and what we need to know to be more effective when conflict occurs. I'm going to ask everybody to consider what is your typical response to conflict. There are 5 F's. They're called the 5 F's. And they are fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and fester. Fight is exactly what it sounds like. People that their initial response to conflict is to fight it out, they're going to assertively go in and aggressively fight their point. If flight is the response, then these are the people that will avoid or escape the conflict by withdrawing and refusing to engage. If you freeze, people that freeze become immobilized by conflict and they are unsure how to proceed, which causes this immediate inaction in them. Somebody that fawns as a response to conflict is the person that attempts to appease the other party by giving in excessively and like overly accommodating them. And a person that festers is suppressing or ignoring the conflict. They're just like pushing it down. So they're just kind of stuffing it down and ignoring it. And it's a lot, very similar to avoidance. Because, but what happens is they're allowing that resentment and that underlying kind of cancer that builds as a result of it, those negative feelings to build up. And at some point, it is going to come to the surface. So why are we worried about difficult conversations? Why do we avoid them? Many times we avoid hard conversations or conflict because we're worried about hurting somebody's feelings. Sometimes we're worried about rejection. We may be concerned that we're not going to get the outcome that we want or that we could make the situation worse. It's not uncommon for this to be, one of the reasons that we don't engage. So I've mentioned conflict resolution. But before we can actually resolve conflict, we have to get more comfortable with discomfort that we feel when conflict occurs. And that's building resilience to it. So the prerequisite to resolution is resilience. So without building resilience, we are going to be ineffective in finding resolution to anything that we disagree with when we have moments of tension with people. No flower should ever grow in this environment. It just shouldn't. It's just not an environment where we would expect to see a flower grow. And what we need to do is, this would be the environment that we would see as a threat if it were a conflict. And what we need to do is we want to find a way to see it as an opportunity and be thinking, this isn't going to shut us down. This isn't going to thing that's going to make us die. We're going to thrive in this and we're going to find a way to thrive. So resilience really involves maintaining engagement in a disagreement, even when it becomes uncomfortable. So those who can dance with and reframe conflict as a tool for stronger relationships is going to be the person that is going to allow for smarter solutions, and they're going to tend to navigate those disagreements more successfully. So by understanding our current feelings and our behavioral patterns, which is why I asked us to take a look at what is our conflict style? What is the one we lean into? And I can tell you, of those 5 F's, I flee. I used to avoid, just if there was an opportunity to escape and get out of Dodge when a conflict occurred, that was me. I would, if I couldn't get away from it, then I was the person that would freeze. And if I felt really, really cornered, I would overly appease and I would fawn. So I would do multiple of those things. But by understanding how I would respond to conflict and what my current feelings were and behavioral patterns, I was able to start shifting my thought process about what I was going to do when I was faced with these moments and develop a more effective approach. And that's building resilience. So we want to avoid one of the things that trip us up the most when we find ourselves in conflict or in a disagreement or there's tension in the room. We want to avoid being emotionally hijacked by our own emotions, by our own feelings. So ask yourself, who's in the driver's seat when you get triggered? Because when we get triggered by something, it's an automatic, it's kind of a nervous system response. It's just an automatic response of what we do. And what we want to start to do is build some resilience and emotional intelligence so that we don't get hijacked in this moment. And so we're going to really spend a few minutes here exploring what emotional intelligence is and how it is applied into building resilience to a moment that's difficult. Emotional intelligence is about knowing ourselves. This is about us, and it's not about the person that we're disagreeing with or the person that is maybe pushing back at us in a difficult way and causing this discomfort and tension. Emotional intelligence is also called EQ, and it's knowing you. Our IQ is the things that we know, the things that we've learned, that we spent years studying, that we can regurgitate, and we can, we feel really comfortable in our knowledge base. Knowledge is not emotional intelligence. Knowing ourselves involves self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. So let's focus in the first two elements of this being self-awareness and self-regulation. Self-awareness involves being able to identify our emotions accurately. And that means identify and articulate our emotions with greater precision, which is going to allow us to foster self-awareness about what we're going to do, right? When we feel triggered. So understanding our emotional triggers and being able to recognize those specific feelings when we feel triggered are going to help us make sense of what is what is that when I feel triggered in this way, this is the feeling and the emotion that always comes up in the response that I have to different situations. I like to think of regulation once I can name and recognize what I'm feeling when I get triggered. I like to think of regulation as like a thermostat on the wall. So once I can accurately identify the emotions that I'm feeling and understand the triggers that cause that emotion, then I can pause for a brief moment of mindfulness. And that allows me to turn the thermostat down just enough so that that amygdala of my brain that lights up and I have that automatic response when I feel triggered and I just want to go at it, has a moment to pause. So by regulating and doing that brief moment of mindfulness for myself, I will just quietly count backwards from 5 and take a breath. That brief moment of doing that allows me to bring myself back into my body and regulate and turn the thermostat down. And then I can make a different choice of how I'm going to proceed forward in that difficult moment. This is where, so how do we practice understanding our, identifying our emotions and our triggers so that we can learn to regulate? This is where I like to introduce something called the feelings wheel. This is a wheel that was designed by psychologist Gloria Wilcox in 2017, and it was designed to help us identify and articulate our emotions more precisely and aid in our self-awareness. When we recognize the specific feelings when we're triggered, then we can better understand the emotional responses that we have typically to that trigger. And this supports our emotional regulation, and it empowers us to manage our reactions better, turn that thermostat down, and make healthier choices in challenging situations. Now, I'm going to give you a very quick example of how you can practice with this wheel. And I started using this wheel for the first time several years ago inside the prison system here in my home state of Oregon. I work with adults in custody in a restorative justice program. And as you can imagine, a lot of these men don't have great impulse control. And it's much of the reason why they have found themselves in prison. And so once I saw this tool in action, I'm like, this is something I need to do. I need to do this for myself. So how do we use it? If we take a look at this, I'm going to give you an example and say that something has happened and my initial response or the initial feelings that we often hear people say that they are having are in the center of this wheel. And I'm going to say that something has triggered me and I feel angry. I am ticked off. Like my brain is lighting up. So when I feel angry, then what I want to do is look at the second wheel, second, ring in this wheel. And I'm going to tell you that I feel aggressive. I'm angry and I feel aggressive. I want to go after this, right? So then if I take aggressive and I go out to the very outer ring of the wheel, I have two options in the feeling of aggressive, and it's provoked and hostile. So I'm going to tell you as an example, I'm feeling angry, which is stemming from I feel aggressive, and the emotion that I'm having is I feel provoked, right? So in that moment with that situation, what triggers me is I feel really provoked, which is an aggressive, I feel aggressive and provoked, and that makes me really angry, right? So I can identify, once I identify and articulate that, then I have an opportunity. I'm much more self-aware. Then I'm going to practice that mindfulness exercise, count backwards from 5, regulate that, bring myself back into my body, and I'm going to have an opportunity to make different choices. I use this all the time. I use it watching the news. I use it reading social media. I will use it when I'm honestly even watching reality television and somebody does something really stupid or something that I think is really triggering. So it's you can use it and practice with it, but it's a really good tool. Now, the last 3 elements of emotional intelligence are empathy, motivation, and social skills. Empathy, if you are in an industry where you are working professionally with animals, empathy is not new to us. It is something that we deal with every day. And it points to our ability to be able to listen and understand and appreciate somebody else's experience. Even if we haven't experienced that same exact thing ourselves, we can still empathize with it. But the real trick is, can we be empathetic after being emotionally triggered? Can I be empathetic towards somebody else's experience that has just triggered me? And if this happens in the training room or in a meeting with another animal professional, I'm going to have to really work on my emotional intelligence to be able to regulate so that I can still remain empathetic in that moment. My motivation in conversation, in working on my EQ, needs to be in the arena, always needs to be in the area of self-improvement. I should never be motivated to develop my EQ because I want to be right. I want to prove myself right. I want to be heard, or that I feel like I want recognition for anything. None of that. It should always stay in the arena of I'm doing this because I want to improve my skills and my emotional EQ. When I do these elements, then our ability to build and maintain healthier social and professional relationships can occur. And it's hinged on these combined parts of EQ that allow us to be fully present and hold space for others when needed, even if we've been triggered. So emotional intelligence and EQ is a huge factor in building resilience to conflict, because we have to know ourselves before I can expect to be able to be effective in a hard dialogue or conversation with somebody else. We want to create, when we're working and talking with people, we want to create a safe space. But I often, hear us talk about this is a safe space, but nobody ever really defines it. Well, let's define it. A safe place is defined as an environment in which a person or category of people can feel confident that they are not going to get exposed to discrimination, criticism, harassment, or any other form of emotional or physical harm. Exactly what I want to have happen. This is not only about my skills as a trainer. This is about creating an emotionally safe environment so that the people that I'm talking to, the people that I'm working with, the people that I am professionally engaged with, feel that they're in an environment where they feel emotionally safe, and I have the opportunity then to get better information from them. So safe spaces don't happen just because we say that this is a safe environment. Safe spaces have to be deliberately crafted and maintained. And there are 2 conditions of safety that we want to be mindful of when we're talking to people. The first is mutual purpose, and the second is mutual respect. Mutual purpose means that my clients or the people that I'm engaged with have the perception that we have come together to work towards a common goal. Even if we disagree about what we are talking about, we have come together to work towards a common goal. Mutual respect means that My clients also have the perspective that at no point in time are they going to ever feel the need to defend themselves, to need to defend anything that they've said to me, that they're sharing with me, that they've tried, or that they've done in front of me or said in the training room. So that's really, really important. And then we have to maintain those conditions in order to be more effective with the people that we're working with. When we're in conversation with people, I want to use something called the matching principle, because this is really important in how we communicate. We want to recognize shifts in conversation and identify when the shift, when the shift occurs. So we want to identify when conversations move between problem solving mode to somebody's getting emotional, and then to social modes. And social modes mean this is how they see themselves in the world. This is how they self-identify. This is crucial for effective communication. When we are able to match what's going on here, when we notice that the conversation or what somebody's telling me has shifted into a different mode. We're no longer in problem solving, where we're task oriented and we're creating a training plan and we're working on management maybe, but somebody's sharing with me something really difficult or something that scares them about their dog. Then I need to shift with them, because what I need to do is I am building credibility, and I want them to know that I'm actively listening and I'm in this game. I want to keep those doors of safety open. This is going to build resilience in my ability. So when we hit a hard moment or a hiccup, I'm going to be able to be present, okay? Because I want to show up and I want to be present. So I'm going to need to adapt my approach and, adjust my communication style to match the current conversation, okay? And that means I'm going to ask some questions to support the moment that they've shifted into. So if they've shifted from problem solving into emotions, I'm going to ask a couple of questions so that they know that I'm supporting that moment that they're in, and I'm getting information from them that's important, because I have to find out what's important to them so that I can figure out those points of connection of where we're going to be able to start working together, because we need to become a team in this. When I do this, then I close those communication gaps. I want to avoid those gaps in communication. And when we stay in one mode, if we're in problem solving mode and our client is moving somewhere else and we're not keeping up, then we reduce our impact, right? And we close that then we widen that communication gap, and we want to close that. We want to stay flexible and maintain, our strong communication skills. We want to be able to show up and listen effectively. One of the other things that we want to be paying attention to is the power of nonverbal cues or nonverbal signaling. Everybody, I'm telling you, everybody uses nonverbal signaling. That includes facial expressions, hand gestures, mannerisms, use of space. Are they fidgeting? Are they silent? All of those things. Discussions are filled with nonverbal signals, and this is going to help us really understand how people, what people are actually feeling. And I want to introduce something called the 738-55 rule, and I lean into this rule a lot. So we're really good at reading dogs. We are super good at reading dogs, not quite so good at reading people, because we don't necessarily open, our lens in that way. The 738-55 rule tells us that this was, coined from psychologist Dr. Albert Moravian, and he was doing research in how emotions affect communications. And what he found is that the words people use when they're talking to us and telling us about a situation or a hard moment or something, that's difficult for them, gives us 7% of what's emotionally going on for them. The tone of voice that they use when they're telling us is an additional 38%. But the nonverbal signaling that they use when they're telling us, and the tone of voice that they're using, gives us 55%, reveals 55% of what's actually impacting them in that moment. And so that really emphasizes the power of these nonverbal cues. So if I'm not paying attention to nonverbal signaling, I risk losing a lot of information that could be really valuable. Again, I'm building credibility, and my clients know that I'm showing up for them, and I'm not going directly into fix-it mode. So remember, I called myself a recovering fixer, because that's exactly what I used to do. I would immediately dive into training tools, or telling somebody why the attempts that they had made, or the tools that they were using, or the philosophy that they believed in or were leaning into wasn't going to work, or was ineffective, or actually causing harm to their dog. And all I was doing was closing the door on safety. I wasn't getting the best information, and I wasn't building a relationship with people that then when we hit a hiccup or a hard conversation later, I had footing to be able to navigate through and sit with it differently. So the real, pay attention to nonverbal signaling as one of your tools of communication. What we want to really do is suspend judgment. People are going to do things, they're going to say things that we don't want to hear, that we don't, that are going to cause conflict in us, that we're not going to love, that we're not going to enjoy. And if it triggers us, we need to really develop that emotional EQ. But the real key is that we need to suspend judgment, avoid making those quick assumptions and value judgments of what somebody's saying or what we're seeing them do. And we want to stay curious. So the most basic of all human needs is to understand and be understood. And the best way to understand people is to actually listen to them. And so ask yourself this: if I were going to give you one huge tip, it's going to be this. When you are in conversation with somebody and maybe they're saying things that you disagree with, or you are hitting a moment of tension, ask yourself, are you listening to understand, or are you listening to respond? If you're listening to respond, if you're listening to respond, then I want you to pause and ask a question instead. Instead of telling them something that you feel like they need to know so that they can know the truth and they can come to your side and understand and just try our methods, we need to be listening to understand first before we can attempt to have them try something that may be new and outside their comfort zone. Okay. So there's some other tricks of communication that I've learned to use over the years. And one is called mirroring and the other is called looping. Mirroring will always occur before I loop. One of the pitfalls we want to be careful of is not feeling like a therapist. And mirroring is really comes from a place of genuine curiosity, where I'm going to mirror back 1 to 3 words that have been really kind of emotional for somebody when they're explaining something to me. I don't want to repeat full sentences, 1 to 3 words, but it's those charged words that somebody will say. And I will just use it as, in a set, use it like I'm asking a question. And then I pause because it gives them an opportunity to expand on those words. An example of that is if I have somebody saying to me, my dog just needs consequences. He just needs some consequences to his behavior because everything we've tried isn't working. And I feel like we're not being firm enough. And all I have to do is, if I'm mirroring, is say, he needs consequences, and when I repeat that and I pause, then my client will go into this whole explanation about what consequences mean for him, what his history in that is, and then I have an opportunity to shape that forward. It's not how maybe his consequences aren't what I want, but I have an opportunity to shape it. Looping is where I am going to paraphrase. I'm going to paraphrase back the facts of what I've seen happen and what I feel like, what I see in their feelings that are coming up as a result of what's happened. I'm going to ask them if I've got it right. They have an opportunity then to correct me if I don't have it right. And I'll just say, I don't want to be mechanical. I'm just going to be like, hey, before we move on, I want to make sure I've got this right. It sounds like you're feeling frustrated because your dog is, lunging at people, and it feels scary when that happens. And like, you're out of control. Do I have that right? They have an opportunity to correct me. And then once they tell me, yeah, that's it, you've got it right, then we have a connecting point of we're working together on the same problem. And I'm going to use that as we move forward. Now, this is hard, and it's really hard stuff. We are in a helping profession, and I'm giving you a very abbreviated version of building resilience and tools of communication. The other thing that's really important is that we need to make sure that we have really good personal and professional boundaries and self-care in place. Develop a network of people that you can confide in. Give yourself some grace, because this stuff is really hard. It's not easy, and it doesn't come overnight. You're going to have to practice it. Taking a step back can be beneficial, and it's okay to let go of a client that isn't a good fit. Not every discussion will end positively, and that's okay. We want to practice self-compassion and create what I like to call a metaphorical wishing well, where we are going to drop things in that we wish had gone differently in that conversation that didn't end well. focus on improvement without harsh self-judgment, because this is really about progress and not perfection. And my quick takeaways today are: the next time that you want to explain why something isn't working in training, ask a question instead. Develop your emotional EQ, stay curious, listen, understand, mirror and loop, and have really good self-care in place. And thank you so much for your time. I look forward to the questions that you're going to have for me, because this is one of my favorite topics. And I have a reading list that I want to share with you. These are some of my favorite books. I hope that you enjoyed what I had to offer today. And thank you so much for spending some time with me.